The House of Shadows. When Harry and Hannah arrived at the abandoned house, they thought it was simply a property they'd inherited from a distant, unknown relative. The place was old, remote, and surrounded by a dense forest that gave it an air of mystery. From the moment they saw it, Hannah felt a strange unease, though Harry dismissed it, convincing her it was just nerves from the move. Upon entering, they noticed the house had retained an eerie charm, almost frozen in time, with furniture covered in dusty sheets and objects left exactly as the previous owner had left them. In the dim light, they explored the place, finding relics from another era, an antique piano, paintings of unknown ancestors with hollow eyes, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. Their first night was calm, but Hannah found it difficult to sleep. In the early hours, she awoke suddenly, feeling a presence watching her. She looked around the room, but saw only shadows, and Harry was fast asleep beside her. Convinced she was letting her imagination run wild, she went back to sleep. As the days passed, strange things started happening. Doors they'd left open were closed, objects moved from their places, and a constant creaking of the wood floors echoed through the corridors at night. Harry tried to rationalize it, suggesting the house was old and settling, but Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that something else was there. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the living room, they found an old journal hidden inside one of the drawers. The cover was worn and the pages yellowed with age. Out of curiosity, Hannah began reading aloud. "The shadows speak to me. They know my secrets, my fears. I feel them surrounding me, creeping closer every night. I fear one day I will no longer belong to myself." She stopped, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Harry shrugged it off, suggesting it was the rambling of a previous owner who was likely disturbed. But Hannah felt the words resonated deeply with her, as if they were a warning. That night, Hannah awoke to the sound of footsteps outside their bedroom. She nudged Harry awake, and, grabbing a flashlight, they both stepped into the hallway, finding it engulfed in darkness. As they walked, shadows seemed to shift around them, moving in ways that didn't make sense. When they turned the corner, they found nothing but silence and stillness. Back in their room, Hannah whispered, "Harry, I don't feel safe here." Harry tried to comfort her, insisting they were letting the eerie ambiance get to them. But that night, he too struggled to sleep, feeling as if unseen eyes were fixed on them in the darkness. As days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences escalated. Hannah began hearing whispers at night, voices she couldn't fully understand, yet sounded hauntingly familiar. The walls seemed to breathe, the air heavy and oppressive. Every room carried an unsettling energy, as if the shadows were watching, waiting. One night, while alone in the house, Hannah saw something that made her blood run cold. As she glanced into the mirror in the hallway, she saw a figure behind her, a shadowy silhouette, featureless, yet unmistakably present. When she turned, the figure vanished, leaving only an empty room. She fled, her heart pounding, finding Harry in the garden. Out of breath, she told him what she'd seen. Harry, now visibly disturbed, decided they couldn't ignore it any longer. Together, they searched the house, hoping to find an explanation, perhaps a hidden room or some object that could be causing the disturbances. In the attic, among forgotten boxes and old furniture, they found a large, locked trunk. After prying it open, they uncovered a series of journals, all belonging to previous occupants of the house. The entries were filled with accounts eerily similar to their own experiences. "The shadows follow me. I hear them in the night. I see them in the mirrors. They want something, but I don't know what. I am afraid of becoming one of them." Reading these words, Harry felt an overwhelming dread. It wasn't just them. The shadows had haunted everyone who'd lived there, as if the house held a curse. In one final entry, they found a chilling message. "The shadows consume. They become us as we become them. Once seen, they can never be unseen." Realizing the truth, Harry and Hannah decided they couldn't stay another night in that place. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding off the fear of those who entered. The shadows weren't mere specters, they were an entity, a darkness that grew stronger with each soul it touched. Packing their belongings hurriedly, they tried to leave. But as they reached the front door, they found it locked, the handle cold and immovable. Every door and window had sealed itself, trapping them inside. The house had claimed them. The last thing Hannah remembered was the shadows closing in, surrounding them as the darkness filled every corner of the room. She could feel them. They were hungry, consuming the last of her strength, her voice, her very self. Days later, the house stood empty once again, silent and waiting. On the dusty table in the living room, the journal lay open to a new entry, the ink fresh and dark. We are here now, part of the shadows, watching, waiting for the next ones who dare to enter. Exhumation. I never thought that being a gravedigger could frighten me. When I accepted the job at the city cemetery, I imagined ghost stories and wandering spirits were just that, stories. But that night, everything would change. It was a Tuesday when I was called for an exhumation. The body of a man buried just 2 years ago needed to be removed. The reason? Police investigations. At that moment, I had no idea I was about to live a nightmare. I arrived at the cemetery at dusk as the sunlight faded, leaving behind a crimson sky that seemed ominous. The cemetery was a labyrinth of gravestones and shadows, each carrying the memory of someone who had departed. The trees swayed with a whispering wind, as if discussing my presence. I prepared the tools, and as I dug, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The first shovel of dirt revealed a strong, nauseating smell, a clear sign that time had treated that body cruelly. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of metal hitting the wooden coffin. Then I heard a noise, a crack among the trees, but I didn't dare look. I continued my work, trying to ignore the chill running down my spine. Finally, after long minutes of digging, the coffin lid appeared. The wood was rotting, and a feeling of revulsion overtook me as I imagined what might be inside. I was unprepared for what I would find. Curiosity and fear battled in my chest as I removed the lid, revealing a dark, foul interior. As the lid opened, a nauseating odor hit me. The sight of the decomposing body was shocking. But what truly paralyzed me was the detail I noticed upon closer inspection. The man's face was twisted in an expression of terror, as if trapped in an eternal nightmare. A wave of horror surged through me. How could someone die like this, tormented even after death? I tried to push the thoughts away and focused on my work, but a strange sensation enveloped me. I looked around, and the cemetery, which had seemed just a resting place, now felt alive, pulsing with negative energy. A strong wind blew, and the shadows appeared to stretch and twist, forming figures that danced among the graves. With the body finally removed, a biting cold overtook me. I felt watched, but I couldn't see anyone. When I decided it was time to leave, I noticed my pickaxe had fallen from my hand. As I bent to pick it up, I saw something shining in the earth. A small object, perhaps a ring, glinted under the moonlight. I hesitated, but curiosity overcame me. When I picked it up, a chill ran through my body. It was a gold ring, adorned with a black stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. Without thinking, I put the ring in my pocket, a mistake that would cost me dearly. As I stood up, a sense of despair washed over me. The trees were now whispering more intensely, as if trying to warn me. I descended the hill, but each step felt heavier than the last. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. When I finally reached the cemetery exit, I looked back and saw a hooded figure standing among the graves. My heart raced. The figure seemed to float, not touching the ground, and its eyes shone with an intensity that made me freeze. The night passed, but the fear did not. On my way home, the ring felt like it was burning my skin in my pocket. I tried to ignore it, but the urge to look at it was unbearable. Finally, in a moment of weakness, I took it out. The black stone reflected a strange light, and as I held it, a wave of visions engulfed me, glimpses of a terrifying past. The man whose exhumation I performed was telling me his story. He had been murdered, and his soul was trapped between worlds, seeking revenge. Terror seized me. I didn't know how it was possible, but I felt he was linked to me, that I was now part of his story. In the following days, strange things began to happen. Whispers at night, objects moving, and the shadow of the hooded figure appearing in my dreams. With each passing night, I felt myself sinking deeper into darkness. The ring seemed to have a life of its own, and with every hour, its influence over me grew. Desperate, I returned to the cemetery, determined to return the ring. Fear accompanied every step, and the hooded figure felt closer than ever. When I reached the man's grave, the full moon illuminated the spot, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. I placed the ring on the gravestone, and as I did, a deafening scream echoed through the air. The figure appeared before me, its eyes burning like embers. The wind intensified, carrying away leaves and dirt. I knew I couldn't stay there. I started to run, but the sound of footsteps behind me seemed to draw closer. With every turn I took, the cemetery became a maze, the shadows closing in around me. Finally, I reached the exit, but the figure was in my way. I looked at it, and for the first time, I saw its face. It was the man I had exhumed. His gaze was filled with pain and anger, and I realized I was responsible for his agony. "Give me back my peace," he shouted, his voice echoing in my mind. Panic overtook me. With one last effort, I lunged toward the gravestone, where the ring still glimmered. As soon as I touched it, a flash illuminated the cemetery, and the man let out one last scream before disappearing into a cloud of shadows. A sepulchral silence engulfed the place. Fear was replaced by a sense of relief, but not before I realized that the figure had vanished, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. I never returned to the cemetery. The ring is still buried there, but I carry with me the memory of that night. That man will never be forgotten. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, I hear whispers reminding me of what I did. The exhumation was not just of a body, but of a terror that took root in my essence. And now, I am part of that story, trapped between worlds, forever linked to the darkness I could not escape.